Welcome to the second ever episode of IRL Ventures Travel Video Creators Podcast. I am Ed Ventures. I'm your host tonight or today, depending on when you're watching. And we have a really, really awesome show lined up for you. I'm really excited. We have Jenn and Scott from the Walk with History YouTube channel and Talk with History podcast. So what's really interesting about them is they kind of blend history and travel together, which is really awesome. And they've been growing really, really fast. So I'm really excited to have them on today. Jenn and Scott are the hosts with Walk with History YouTube channel and Talk with History podcast. Their mission is helping people explore historic locations to personally connect with the past. Jenn is a historian and former Navy pilot with a master's degree in American history and a certificate in museum studies. And Scott produces videos and podcasts for Walk with History and Talk with History and edits historynewsletter.com. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Scott and Jenn. Ooh, there we go.
Perfect timing, Jenn.
Perfect timing. With this.
Perfect timing. As we know, sneeze right when you get unmuted. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. So Walk with History is your YouTube channel. Talk with History is your podcast.
Yep.
So if you want to follow them on Instagram or Facebook, you just search Walk with History and you'll find them. So I want to ask you first off, like, how did you get started wanting to make travel videos? Because that's like really interesting to me, like how everyone gets started. How do they like decide I want to be a content creator? Also, for anyone who's watching, please feel free to ask any questions in the comments and we'll be happy to answer them or just say hi.
Well, it really started, Scott was already making content. He'd already been practicing. He had bought a Mac computer. He had Final Cut Pro, and he was practicing making family videos. And I had taken a break from social media during the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, it was during COVID.
And I started watching some YouTube videos, and I wanted to see certain things, and they weren't covered on YouTube. And so I thought, what if I did this? I had just finished my master's degree in American history. I had the knowledge. Scott had the editing and the video making knowledge. I thought together we could really do this. And I didn't want to do talking head. I didn't just want to sit somewhere and tell you history. I wanted to take you there. And I wanted to show you what it might have felt like for those people, and to stand where they stood and to see what they saw and to be in the presence of the giants of history. Like, that was the whole point. And there's so much history in America. There's history in everyone's backyard. So I thought this would be great for people to get outside with their families and do this. And we could kind of show how to do this and what to see. It kind of reminds me of like a diners, drive-ins, and dives, but with history, because you want to go to the location and he's showing you cool places that you didn't know existed. And that's what I am hoping to do too. Show you cool places that you maybe have learned in school, or you remember, you wanted to know more and you wanted to see in real life. And we show you what those are like and how to get there and all the ins and outs. So that's kind of how it started. And it's grown from there. And we've learned different things along the way, but really the whole point of the channel was on location history, taking you to the location.
Yeah. And it was one of those things that, we were lucky enough to kind of get a treadmill just before COVID, because COVID happened and then everybody was buying, home workout stuff. But I remember her walking over one day and said, "Hey, I think I've been watching these YouTube videos. I think we could do this and explain some of this stuff better." And she explained to me kind of the idea. And she had started like a Walk with History Facebook page when we had initially moved to Memphis to kind of just share with friends and family. So it started off as friends and family. She literally just wanted to walk around Memphis and kind of see some of the sites and show and share it. And then she brought this idea up to me a couple years later, and I instantly knew that it was going to work. I knew right away, because I had been kind of self-educating on YouTube and all that stuff. And it's evergreen content. People are interested in going to locations, as you probably know, Ed, right? Like they want to see the location. They want to see what's out there. And then the Walk with History, the brand, I thought was already perfect. And within like 2 hours, I think I had the initial concept for our website. and it was off to the races from there.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I've seen a lot of people that there's a kind of a theme of COVID pushed a lot of people into content creation.
Oh yeah.
So that's definitely something that probably a lot of people that are watching can relate to. But the thing I think is really interesting as well is that, how do you go from a Navy pilot, which first of all, that's pretty crazy. You're like taking off from like aircraft carriers, right? Like and flying around, and then you become, you get a master's in history. So like, where did that come from? Like in your mind of like, okay, I want to go from flying fighter jets to like learning about history, because that's really interesting to me too. That's quite a 180.
My dream from the time I was a little girl was to be a pilot. And I got my wings 3 days after 9/11, and I got to do that and see the world. I met Scott, and it was a different time in my life. I had gotten out of the Navy, started a family, and I had a GI Bill that I earned that I couldn't give to my kids, and I had to use it. And if I didn't use it, I would lose it. And even when you're a pilot in the Middle East, you're always like, what is the history here? Right? Anytime I was flying into like Iraq or flying into Bahrain or flying into Oman, I'm like, what is the history of this area? Like when we went through the Suez. And so I wanted to learn more about this. And that grew into, when we made it back to the States, more about American history. I wanted to know more. And it wasn't just the dates and what happened, but why does it matter? Why do you care? How does it impact you today? What is the lasting effects of this history? So that's kind of what I do in the channel. It's more than just, this is what happened in this location. It's like, this is how it impacts you. And this is why you should want to know the truth of this, because it's influencing you today, whether or not you realize it. So that's what I try to do as a historian, is connect those dots a little bit more. But I think it was just a different time in my life, and I was ready for another challenge. And becoming a historian, a lot of people will be historians, right? They'll claim I'm a historian, which is fine. There are people who do it recreationally or as a hobby, but what makes you an academic historian? And I wanted to learn that. So what does it mean to cite the primary sources? What does it mean to just pull from the primary sources? How do you find the primary sources? What do you validate as historically accurate? And so those are the kind of things you learn as a historian. And it made me feel more confident in the information that I'm relaying when I'm at the location and talking about it.
Awesome. Well, that's a great story. And yeah, so for people that don't know, GI Bill, basically that is like the government gives you money to study, correct?
Yeah, you earn it from your time in service.
Right. So, and then that's, you're like, okay, I don't want to waste this. I want to use it. Mm-hmm. So you did something you're interested in. So that's really cool. So the other thing that I find fascinating about you guys is that you've been growing really fast, which is awesome. So how did you kind of grow? Like what did you find were like the kinds of videos or the kinds of subjects, or like, how did you figure out like, okay, this is working, this isn't, let's go focus on this. And like, what was the experience growing into where you are now?
Yeah. So if you go back and watch some of our earlier videos, right, some of those first ones, I still kind of cringe, and they've definitely evolved over time. But we got pretty lucky, in my opinion, with a pretty early signal that we were onto something with about our 9th or 10th video, and that was when we visited Arlington National Cemetery and kind of tracked down some of the famous movie stars that are buried there. So Maureen O'Hara, Joe Louis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, we did. I think the big one there was Maureen O'Hara.
And so if, for folks who don't know Maureen O'Hara, she did a lot of movies with John Wayne back in the day, right? So John Wayne's pretty well known Western actor from 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And Maureen O'Hara had done...
She's a famous redhead.
She's a famous redhead.
So she'd done The Parent Trap, the original Parent Trap, but she had done movies with him, The Quiet Man, McClintock. Like she was usually his leading lady.
Yeah. And so we had published that video, and that was like our 9th or 10th video. And within like probably the first couple months, right? Maybe within 6 months or so, maybe less than that, it popped off, right? And for our channel at the time, it got a good 50, 60,000 views. And we were like, oh my goodness gracious, I think we're on to something. And that was one of the earliest signals that we had found something that's evergreen content, because these are people who are part of history. And Arlington National Cemetery was kind of meant something to us, as veterans, because we know people who are buried there. And so we got a lot of, that was kind of a feedback signal. And so then eventually we're like, okay, maybe we should do a follow-up one. So we did a follow-up one, which is currently our highest viewed long-form video on our channel, with about 400,000 to 500,000 views over the course of a couple years. And again, we kind of found famous actors and kind of media people who are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And that was the next one. And then we found a couple trends, right? World War II is very popular. Elvis is very popular. But we're actually a little different than some typical history channels. Like, a lot of history channels tend to focus on just World War II or just whatever. We are not afraid to do something that's kind of more off the beaten path, which I kind of like about our channel.
Yeah, and we did things, Ed, that hadn't been done. So that's what Maureen O'Hara did for us. Is there was a lot of people who had covered John Wayne's grave on YouTube, but no one had done Maureen O'Hara. And I don't think people knew she was in Arlington, because she was married to a former brigadier general, and he's buried at Arlington. So she's buried at Arlington. And I couldn't find her grave on YouTube. So we were the first channel to cover her grave on YouTube.
Right.
And Scott's really great with the editing, because we edit in parts of the movie. Anytime I'm there and I'm talking about it, he edits in parts of the movie, so it'll jog your memory as you're watching. And like Scott said, another one we did that no one had done is I do the Band of Brothers at Arlington. No one had done that, right? And so we just think outside of the box, but things that we know people would be interested in and seeing. And then we also make it so if you want to see these graves, this is how you find them. This is where they're at. This is how I recommend going, since Arlington is such a big location and you don't want to double back. Like, this is the route you should take. So I give that advice as well. Right. And it's that we didn't know, but that's the niche that it kind of took. And those grew rather quickly. There's been some things that have grown fast that we were kind of surprised by. I know I covered Loretta Lynn, and I remember driving by the coal mine from Coal Miner's Daughter.
She's an old country music star.
She sings that song, Coal Miner's Daughter, and she said her father would shovel coal for a poor man's dollar. And I stopped by the coal mine and I say, this is the coal mine where her father shoveled coal for a poor man's dollar, and he would make 25 cents a ton. Right. And that video was, I think, our first one to go to 1 million, right?
That was on Instagram.
On Instagram.
Yeah.
And so you just don't know. And I remember, like, there'd be moments where I'm like, I want to stop at this coal mine. Scott's like, no one wants to do that. And I'm like, no, I think this will be good. And we do it. And then it shoots off and he's like, okay, he doesn't question.
And so the growth, so that was kind of some of the early signals, right? And the growth has kind of been steady with spikes as it increases. And obviously, the more you do something, the better you get at it. I feel like my storytelling, that's one big thing that I've really, really tried to just get really good at. To me, that is the most important thing, right? She focuses on the history. I focus on the storytelling aspect of it. What's the story here? Can I get the hook in the beginning? Can I have some twists early on? Can I set up a little bit of an arc? And so, to me, I just kind of keep chipping away. And honestly, the growth comes from consistency and just doing it for a while. And we still have our duds, it still happens.
And the truth is too, we have a catalog now. And as things become popular in culture, people reach back for the catalog. So evergreen content, our MLK video just took off.
Yeah, Martin Luther King.
And I think it's because they're going to release those files. And because they're going to release those files, that video just took off. So you never know what's going to hit when. But if you have it in your catalog, it's there for people to find.
I think that video is over almost 3 years old. And it had about maybe 10,000 views over the course of 3 years. And then the election happened and it was put out on the news that, administration was going to declassify like JFK files and MLK files. And I'm pretty sure people started going on the internet and searching for Martin Luther King, what actually happened. And bam, our video goes from 10,000 views and now it's like at 160, 170,000 views. So that's one of the other things we realized early on is that evergreen content, right? History is not going to change, right? You might find something new out.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it won't change.
So basically, like people say, yes, you should be, jumping on trends. You should be doing stuff that's currently popular, but there are videos that you said evergreen content, right?
Yeah.
Stuff that is going to be there, not like necessarily, because there's some videos it's like, okay, what's the best content, strategy for 2025? In 2026, it's outdated, right? Yeah. So, yeah, and you could do things like little tricks for like, you could change the title from 2025 to 2026.
Thumbnail, yeah.
But the information might not be accurate any longer. So making some videos that are just, always going to have interest is also a smart idea. So like doing a little bit of both, or if you can double down and like maybe something just happened, but people can look back and, think about it. Like, let's say, Wicked, the movie just came out, right? So if you do like something about history of Wizard of Oz and the book, and then the original movie, and then Wicked the play, and then the movie, and it's like there's all these things that it's like, yes, the movie just came out, but people can still be interested and learn about, okay, how did the production of the movie happen? How was the story written? What influences did the author go through to write the story in the first place? And then how did the person, because even the play is based on a book.
Yeah, absolutely.
that was written based on another book in a movie, so it's like there's all these things you could do.
Yeah, we did something similar, exactly what you're talking about, right? So Steven Spielberg came out with that Masters of the Air miniseries that was kind of like like the aviation part of the Band of Brothers era, right? So World War II. And so we knew that was coming. And so we had kind of anticipated that. We had gone to Arlington and found some of those pilots who had flown in that were going to be in this miniseries. They were buried at Arlington. And so we got that video out right around the time when the miniseries was released, just like you said. Then we also reviewed a couple episodes of the miniseries. So there is definitely some trends that you can kind of anticipate, especially for stuff like us, because they're always making movies based on historical events, right?
Yeah.
Napoleon and stuff like that.
Yeah. And the other thing too that I thought was interesting is when you talked about your process of creation and not only like what's going to be, interesting to the audience, but then creating the narrative behind it. So when you go out to shoot these different locations, do you have that kind of idea in mind where you're like, okay, I got to get this kind of shot because I want to connect it to this thing that I want to do for the narrative? Or does it kind of all come together in post-production?
So I would say early on, we would just kind of go out there and go do it. I'd say as we've grown and as I've learned, we've tried to be better about pre-production and kind of really talking about,
we storyboard a little.
She gives me the topic idea. Hey, we're going to go to, this spot in Tennessee where some battle happened. First thing I ask her is like, what's the story, right? Who's the character? And so I'm constantly, as I think we've gotten better, literally just from, years and years of practice, is that pre-production. I try to think, okay, what's going to be the interesting thing in the beginning? That's the hook. Okay, that'll help us. Maybe we'll see if we can find a shot near this particular spot on the battlefield. So we have that in the first, couple seconds. And then from there we say, okay, this is the story. Okay, we know that there's a cabin there. Let's do some stuff from the cabin. So the more I've thought about trying to do at least a little bit of pre-production, not a ton, because I've got a full-time job and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But pre-production. And the other thing that's helped is thinking about our thumbnails ahead of time. That has really helped me just from a thumbnail design perspective. I utilize, it's called Spotter Studio, Spotter. And what I'll do in there is I'll go and kind of plug the idea in, and it'll just kind of give me some general ideas on like what the thumbnail could look like.
Interesting.
because it's connected to our, so it kind of connects to our channel, see what performs well. And then it gives you like they say AI, but it's basically like, hey, here's a recommendation on if you're going to go to this battlefield. It's typically a picture of Jen, right, in front of a scene. And so I'll get a couple ideas for thumbnails ahead of time, which will help me kind of frame the overall feel of the video. And then when we get out there, I have these thumbnails saved to my phone. We take some pictures, and then I kind of have done like my thumbnail work ahead of time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a storyboard that you use Spotter Studio to kind of get like a storyboard style, like AI thing. And you're like, okay, and basically how Spotter works, because I'm not super familiar, does it kind of analyze like, okay, these are the kind of thumbnails that are working for this niche, or like what does it do?
It does a little bit of that from what I can tell.
Yep.
Right. So I kind of got started with that, decided to jump into it because that was the one thing after 3.5, almost 4 years. I was like, man, my thumbnails just aren't performing how I want them to. That was kind of like to me, that was the one thing.
Click, right?
Yeah. People click. If they don't click, they don't watch. And so I jumped in there, and the first thumbnail video idea that it gave me, we tried when we did the Elvis video. Yeah. And that video just went bam, and it popped off. Like my our click-through rate was like double, right? Which again, for me, is still very high. It was like, it started off at like 8%, which was really high for me.
I mean, that it can be it's difficult, honestly, to get.
Yeah, it's since come down, right? But that particular video still has a really good, and it was just because I had gotten the idea, and I didn't even take the picture. We took a couple pictures, but I took a screenshot from the video based on like an idea that Spotter gave me. Yeah. And that helped. And my click-through rate just what awesome. Jumped up. And I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to think ahead a little bit and then be more intentional about, getting those thumbnails right.
I'm super guilty of that too. Like, honestly, because I a lot of the times I just like, I'm going to go here and I'm going to shoot. And I need to be better about like planning in advance for that. But yeah, I mean, they say, you never have a second chance to make a first impression. And on YouTube or anywhere on the internet where people are scrolling through, you got to capture their attention and make them want to click and watch, right? Yeah. And then once they start watching, you got to hook them immediately. So that is super important. And it's something that a lot of us, people that are creators overlook, or it's not the most fun necessarily part of the creation process. And I definitely, like, full transparency, I need to be better about that too. I need to plan my thumbnails ahead of time. So I'll be looking at Spotter Studio actually. It's pretty interesting.
I've actually really enjoyed it because you kind of go in there, essentially you just, with Spotter, you kind of plug in your general video idea, and it kind of spits out like some initial stuff, and it'll say, here's some video title recommendations, and you can kind of iterate. You like, I like this, but don't include that or whatever. Right. Same thing for thumbnails. Cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture it. I'm gonna have to look up afterwards and see what it looks like, because that's super interesting.
Yeah, it's to me, that was a big pivot point for us recently, like probably within the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Made a difference.
Cool. So we're talking about all this stuff. I want to go into something before we run out of time, because I know you got some doozies of stories here. And we all have those stories as travel video creators, IRL streamers. We all have some crazy stuff that's happened to us while we were making videos. So I know, Jen, when we spoke earlier, you had mentioned, okay, I got a crazy story. I don't want to spoil it for you. I'm going to tell it on the live on the podcast. So I'm just asking, what's some crazy stories that have happened to you during your content creation?
So I would say it kind of all relates to this one thing. We were doing a Western road trip, and we were driving out to Tennessee, and I kept noticing all these people who had written on the back of their cars, heading for a bachelorette party, buy me a drink, here's my Venmo. So when you drove by, you could Venmo them. And I told Scott, what if we wrote on the back of our car, Talk with History, listen to Talk with History, and here's our channel. And so we stopped at the first Hobby Lobby or the first Michael's and got the chalk markers, and I wrote it on the back of the car. And what was interesting about that is we put a Venmo on there, and like in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, someone Venmoed us $5 for coffee. Yeah. and they said, we just saw your car. I still get that today. I just saw your car, became a subscriber because I keep it on the car now. But the first place I was recognized was the farthest out parking lot in Battle of Little Bighorn.
In Montana.
And if you know, the Battle of Little Bighorn's on the Crow Reservation. So I'm on the Crow Reservation, farthest out parking lot, telling the story of the Battle of Little Bighorn. And somebody walks up to me and says, "Are you Jenn of Walk with History?" And I was like, "Yeah, hi." Like,
yeah.
It was like,
That's
I can't believe it was so cool. My first time being recognized at the farthest out place I have ever been.
And I think we were like 2,000 or 3,000 miles from our home in Norfolk at the time. I mean, we were literally as far away from our home at the time as humanly possible.
We've ever been. And so
Did you create a video on Little Bighorn before, or
no, we were making
podcast?
it then.
We were.
Oh, so it wasn't even someone listened to it and then went there. That was just
we were in the process.
Yeah.
And so we took pictures with them and stuff. But that also, we were driving to DC one time. And again, it's written on the back of the car. And we pulled up beside this trucker and he's like showing me something in the window. And I'm like, oh gosh, what is this trucker showing me? Like, what's he trying to?
It's like pointing down.
I know.
Oh no.
Oh God. And he shows me his phone and it's our podcast. He's listening to our podcast.
That's a good surprise. Yeah.
Right? Yes,
Yeah.
because it's written on the back of the car. So people can say, oh, I want to listen to Talk with History. What's that
That's
about?
cool.
So that was cool. So those are kind of some crazy stories. I've also been recognized in France. I was at St. Mary Igles doing the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and somebody said, "You're Jenn of Walk with History." And he lived there in France, and he followed us. And so that was neat, too. So
That's awesome.
Those are like my crazy stories, is being recognized and just not expecting it and just being like, wow, this is so cool. But But riding on the back of the car was really, it's been fun. We've gotten subscribers from that. We've gotten money from that. So.
Yeah, don't shortchange kind of old school marketing, man.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah, I say the one thing maybe you might want to be concerned about is then people know your car and your license plate. So
That's true.
if you're worried about,
or if you're a bike driver.
Yeah. Or if you cut somebody off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Commenting your video.
Yes.
But that's like the really cool kind of guerrilla marketing. I also thought about that. I mentioned it in the last podcast as well, but I came up with an idea because I went to this Pod Fest, which is a podcasting conference.
I've heard that.
In January. Yeah. And that's where I met the first guest, actually, Nadine. But during that time, I was like, okay, before I went there, I was like, I want to make an impression. I want to be able to give people something so they can remember me. But I'm like, everyone gives business cards. That's boring. And also most people just throw them out. Right. So I was like, what is something that isn't going to be annoying that people can use that, can be useful to someone? So I was like, lens cleaners. And so I printed out 250 lens cleaner business cards, basically.
Yeah.
So, the ones that clean your glasses, they can clean your phone or your camera lens. And I also do video editing work. So I was like, hey, it's a lens cleaner to remind you, hey, I also do video editing. So if you need anything, email me.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I've never seen this before. This is so unique. And now everyone's like, oh, you're the lens cleaner guy. And everyone remembered me, even though it was my first time. So it's like, there are those things. And there's like a million different things you could do. But you just have to think outside the box and like, what makes you different? What can make you stand out and, make you kind of memorable in people's eyes. So that's awesome. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. No, it's super fun. And, we've kind of, if the rain ever washes it off, we write it right back on there.
And
conversation
we have
starter.
our brand, our Talk with History brand. That's actually me walking across Abbey Road in London.
Oh, cool.
And it's like a stamp. And I told Scott I wanted it to look like a stamp, like you had stamped the location,
right?
Like you had done it. And so that's he designed. That was like our very first design. We haven't changed it, so it's really worked.
So that's awesome. So like the thing I also like about it is it says Walk with History at the top, and then on the bottom it says Talk with History.
Yeah.
So going into that, how did you decide that? Because you created the YouTube channel first, correct?
Yep.
And then you eventually went to the podcast, which is same thing, same growth that I'm doing.
Absolutely.
So how did you decide I want to create a podcast, and like what was the thought behind that and the reasoning?
So that was a little bit driven by me, and I had been listening to Dusty Porter, his podcast, YouTube Creators Hub podcast.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with that one too.
Yeah. So his podcast was so phenomenal, and it was very much of like an inspiration for me. When I was first kind of starting the channel, and I had listened to him, and he had all these guests on, and then eventually he had a guest who kind of said, "Hey, if you're already a video creator, editing and making a podcast is going to seem just night and day easy, right? As far as just the production side goes." And it really is. I mean, like editing video, it takes me on average to make one of our videos probably anywhere from 5 to 7 hours.
Yes.
Right. So, that's how long it takes me to sit down, like really put the thought, like as much as I can into it. Right. So it's better part of a day. And for a podcast, if I'm just doing the audio, I could do that in an hour and a half. If I'm doing video with it, maybe a little bit longer. But they had talked about that. And I was like, man, this makes total sense. Like we could just go deeper into what doesn't make the video cut. Because there's lots of stuff. Don't tell this one. There's lots of stuff that doesn't make the video cut. Lots of stuff that I cut out because I'm trying to keep the story moving along. And so that's why we decided to do Talk with History. And we'd actually tried to do 2 podcasts at the same time. That was a mistake. We tried to do one that was an interview one. We called it the History Buzz. And then we tried to do Talk with History separate. Did that for a little while. Just, it was too much. Ended up kind of combining them. And now we'll do interviews on the podcast as well as just Jenn and I. But it was another opportunity for us to kind of have that deeper connection with our audience, to offer them more detail, more depth, and that deeper connection. And ultimately, they always talk about kind of like, quote unquote, owning your own audience. And that was one of the things that if YouTube changed everything tomorrow, we might not have an audience, right? But with a podcast, they're coming back. RSS feeds, they're going directly to the person. Same thing with a newsletter. Eventually, we also started a newsletter. So that was kind of that slow evolution down that path. And honestly, we really enjoy doing the podcast because we can talk more about it, and it's repurposing the same content, right? We make a video and we just talk about the video, right? And then I might do a short newsletter on it. So we're utilizing the same thing for multiple pieces of content.
Yeah. And I really saw the need for it. I think we were driving to Savannah and I was like, where is a podcast so I can figure out like what should we go see in Savannah, because we were spending 2 days there and I kind of had a plan, but I didn't really have like what are the big things to see. And I found something that kind of covered it. And I said, you know what, this would be great for people who are driving to our locations to listen to this as they go. And they could be like, oh, what are the things to see at Battle Little Bighorn? What are the things to see at Arlington National Cemetery? Where should I park? Should I go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier first? When does the soldier change? What are the dates and times? So those are the kind of things like I was wondering about them in the car driving there. You have this time as you're going to the location to learn before you get there. And I'm like, this would be the perfect place to tell those things. And so it really worked. It worked like hand in hand, coincided with that.
Yeah. And that's also like something that I think is really cool is I went to Hawaii with my girlfriend recently, and that video is forthcoming, but I'm really backed up with a lot of video content. But anyway, while we were there, we discovered there was this app called the Shaka app. And it was, Shaka is that like hand sign, just like, hang loose kind of thing. So when we were driving through Hawaii, on the Big Island, we had a rental car and we listened to this app, which basically was like a guided tour. And it was really, really cool because it knew where you were based on GPS. And then it would play like local Hawaiian music of different genres, like between like the different locations. And then when you were getting close to the location, it would tell you. And before you came up to that location, it would talk about the history. It would talk about like all this stuff. And it was really great because it was my first time in Hawaii. My girlfriend loves it. So she's been there like 5 times, but, and I, it was like having a tour guide, and it allowed us to better appreciate where we were, right? Because without that, you know, you would have to like do a lot of research on your own and figure out and like kind of plot out a trip. But because of the Shaka Guide with this this app that we use, it was kind of like an audio pod, like an interactive kind of audio podcast, and it made a huge difference because then we felt like the weight of where we were, and like, wow, all this amazing history, the natural history of like the volcanoes and animals and all sorts of stuff, and you know, spirituality, ghost stories. There was so many cool things that we learned about these different locations, and it really enhanced the experience. And you know, I think that that's great because what you're doing basically is like that too. You know, if you're going somewhere, you can learn about it, and then because it's one thing you can see somewhere and be like, oh, that's cool, or maybe it doesn't look very cool. Maybe it's like some shack and you're like, okay, what's the big deal? But then once you learn the history behind it, you're like, wow, that's the shack where that important thing happened or whatever. And I can't believe I'm here. And now I know all about it because during the trip, I learned about it. So I think that's really powerful. And it lets people, you know, be able to increase their experience and enrich it, which I think is really cool. And then I believe you guys have like History Mobile. You want to talk about that? The how you came up with the piece of viral marketing?
No, that was not us.
I don't think that
History
was
Mobile.
Although now you have me curious.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. It's in my notes here, so maybe that's not something. But you also write a monthly article for a local magazine, correct?
Yes.
Jen? Okay,
So
that one's correct.
That was correct. I'm like, History Mobile. That's neat, though. It would be neat to have an app like that because you would have to have people in the car, and so unless you're walking, like Colonial Williamsburg is a big video for us, but you have to, you can't drive there.
And it's funny because I had actually had a similar idea, and I had tried to create like an interactive map on our website.
Yes.
It was plugins and it was difficult for me to do, and I just didn't have the time to kind of maintain that. But that was a similar thought, was kind of creating this interactive map of the United States with little symbols, the Walk with History symbol, all around the United States of where we've been. So you could just go like, oh, they've been to Montana, and they'll click on it, and then the Battle of Little Bighorn video would pop up, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I write an article. So Scott does a newsletter, and that goes out to anybody who's ever subscribed, and it's thehistorynewsletter.com. So it's very easy to find it. And then I do a local article here in town. So when I moved here, they had a local magazine. I contacted the editor and I told him who I was and what I did and would he be interested in that. And he said, I would love that. So it's just another way to kind of get your marketing out, get your name out, kind of create your brand. And so I do that for the local community too. Like I'm not only trying to reach people everywhere, but I'm also trying to reach people locally. So that's another thing I do. But yeah, like you said, you never know what little thing is going to be, what's going to hit. And or like you said, the shack, how important the shack is. I stopped at Fort Necessity. That's a little fort outside of Pittsburgh, and it's like nothing, but it's where George Washington was. But that is what, in Hamilton, history has its eyes on you. That's what George Washington's singing about.
In the big Broadway play.
He doesn't say Fort Necessity. He says, I'm younger than you are now, and I was given for my first command. I walked my men straight into a massacre. I witnessed their deaths firsthand. He doesn't tell you what he's talking about, but he's talking about Fort Necessity. If you know Washington history, that's what he's talking about. So I stopped there and I had just worked out. So I'm wearing my workout clothes and stuff, but I'm like, I'm on my way home. I'm just going to make a quick video. And I do the lines and I talk about Fort Necessity and what George Washington learned here. And Chris Jackson, the original George Washington from Hamilton, saw it. He commented on it. He sent me a private message. Wow. He told me how much he loved that, how he never got to visit there, how he always wanted to. And then he told me he was a fan of mine.
Oh, wow.
And then I told him I was a fan of his, and we got to interview him for our 100th podcast. So that's other stuff we do, stuff like that as well.
Yeah. And that's so cool because you don't know who's watching or listening, right? And the depth and breadth of who you can reach and what impact you can have on people. So that's really cool. So the other thing I want to ask you is anyone who wants to create a history focused travel video channel or live stream today or podcast, like how would they get started, and like how would it be like different today and than it was like when you started? Like what's the best advice you have for like starting the right way for a history focused travel channel?
Yeah. So for a history focused travel channel, you know, I would tell someone, I mean, one of the nice things about, you know, doing a history channel is there's you're never going to run out of content ideas, right? That's one of the reasons that I knew this would work, is like I didn't have to come up with the ideas. I also knew that this one would never run out of ideas. So if you're going to start, you start for the right reasons. And it's not so much about that, but it's about, do you see yourself kind of wanting to do this without the video stuff? Like, would you go to these historic sites? Would you travel around seeing history without doing this? And if you would, okay, then you're probably on something, because you're going to do it anyways.
Yeah. Be authentic.
Be authentic.
Because it comes across, right? And my thing is like, don't get nervous. We did the first battle, Bull Run. That's the first battle of the Civil War, right? How many people have done it? A ton of people have done it. So you're probably like, oh, it's been done. I have nothing to say. I did the woman at Bull Run, right? You just look through another lens. There's so much history to tell. There's so much that hasn't been uncovered. Just find a different lens and tell it and be authentic and excited. I had so many people who loved that because they never really thought about what women were doing.
Yeah.
And it's just a great way to bring history. There's so much history. You'll never run out of it. Don't feel like someone's done it.
And for someone who's like legitimately thinking about like trying to become a creator, like this is something they're thinking about, and they're listening to your podcast, watching this video and thinking, I really want to do this. And I love history, and maybe this is something I want to do. Technology is so good now. We've been using the same camera, the camera that we're streaming with right now, for 4 years plus, right? It's the Sony EV1, right? And it is just been going strong. So at 1080p, the majority of our videos, you know, we record the video files in 1080p. You don't need a super fancy high res, this, that, and the other. If you have passion, and then if you focus on the story, right? If you focus on the story and you show more, I'd say tell a little less.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we've kind of learned a little bit over time, is trying to, and then it's just sets and reps, right? If you like to go to the gym, it's sets and reps. You just got to get out there and go do it. So don't worry too much about a big fancy camera. Find something that fits in your budget. Get out there and just kind of start. And don't worry about the music. Like some people complain, like I'm a big music person. Then people are like, that music was awful. And some people love it. And some people are like, hey, I wish there was no music at all. So there's people who want, basically, make the video for yourself. Your audience will find you.
Exactly. Like I was just listening to your podcast before about New Orleans, and you know, music is such an important part of that city, right? And that culture. So, you know, you had kind of like Zydeco and like all this kind of New Orleans style music in the podcast, and I felt like it kind of brought it to life, and I thought that was cool because, you know, not a lot of podcasts do that. And it kind of made me feel like, you know, like a lot of like the NPR radio shows or podcasts, they tend to do that. You know?
We've had those comments. I personally, I always take pride when I get those comments, because I do like doing that stuff.
Yeah. And it kind of elevates it. And, you know, and the thing is, it's intentional, right? It's don't just put music because you feel like, oh, there should be music or whatever. It's got to make sense, and it's got to, you know, but when you listen to your podcast, you know, you kind of can be more enveloped in it because the music, you know, goes with the theme of the podcast topic, which I think is cool. But yeah. And the other thing that you're talking about, being authentic. So I know that you all have gotten your first sponsorships recently, if I could pronounce the word. So another thing too is that we were talking about a little bit before the podcast recording, you know, being authentic and in terms of sponsorships, because it can be very tempting, right, to see the dollar signs and jump on whatever. But if you could, like, you know, talk a little bit about your experience with sponsorships. How did you get your first sponsorships? Did it come to you? Did you seek it out? And, you know, what your thoughts are on all that?
It was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
It was a little bit of both. So we got our first, I always tell people Instagram has been great for us to funnel to the podcast and to YouTube. That's what I use Instagram for. And the sponsorship found us first on Instagram and asked us to make 2 reels and a story. They paid us for them, and those did well.
Yeah, and it was a company called, and I don't know if they're a charity or whatever, but American Battlefield Trust, and we actually were very familiar with them already. Because they help preserve battlefields all around the United States. Do a lot of that kind of work, or people donating, they'll match the dollars and stuff like that. And so they found us on Instagram,
and they save locations. Like, they save locations that are going to be developed. And so they help save them, preserve them for future generations, which is exactly on brand for us. Right. His history is not ours. History is ours to caretake, to give to the next generation. And so it really coincided with, they asked us to go to a place that we were going to. Yeah. It was so funny. We're wow. Yes, we're on our way to Shiloh. We'll make a video of Shiloh for you. And so that performed well. And so then we came back at them with an offer to sponsor the podcast. So we rolled with it.
Yeah.
Right. We didn't wait for them to ask us again. We're like, okay, let's give them more.
Yeah. So I had listened to, there was it's like podcast marketing strategies or something like that. Some random podcast about podcasting. Right. Yeah. And they said, hey, you should, if you're thinking about trying to eventually get a sponsor, you should put together a little pitch deck about your podcast and kind of here's some of the muscle movements, here's some of the exercises.
Right.
And Ed, if you're curious, I'll send you a copy of whatever.
Thank you. That'd be great.
But I had done that, and I had already kind of started prepping it just because this year I had planned on trying to push a little bit more on the podcast, because growing a podcast is very difficult. Mm-hmm. It's very, very difficult. And when American Battlefield Trust we did the initial sponsorship a little over a year ago. They did a second one. And I was like, okay, they've got marketing money. Now I'm going to pitch myself to them. I'm going to say, hey, this is the second time. Would you guys be interested in something a little bit more doing something a little bit more consistent with us? But there's also a good book, and I'll send you, that I started reading. And Ed, I'll send you the name of the book. I found this guy he was a guest on the Creator Science podcast. And he wrote a whole book it's called Sponsor Magnet.
Sponsor Magnet. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have a link to that.
Yeah. I'll send you a link to that. And then I'll send you a link to the PDF that I used. It was like a template that I kind of used to create our own pitch deck.
But it's authentic to brand.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already worked with them before. It's something we already do. It's places we've already visited. So I feel like we could have a long-lasting partnership with them.
Right.
And we waited for it. We waited for the right ones. We were hit with other things, right? Clothing and things like that. But that's not really what we do. Yeah. So we really kind of were holding off until it was something that really was authentic, fit with our brand, something we can feel pride that we're talking about. And I think when you do that, you also feel more, genuine in what you're presenting to your audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically having kind of the industry standard things like a pitch deck, having your elevator pitch ready to go, those sort of things are important. Even if, let's say you don't have opportunities for sponsorships yet, you should have all of those in place ahead of time, correct? Yes. So it's important to try to get those down. And I know that's a tough thing too, because content creators, we have to be kind of, a one-person band, and we got to be graphic artists, we have to be video editors, we have to be videographers, we have to be, script writers, audio engineer, and marketers, right? So it's really, interesting being a content creator. And there's a ton of free information out there as well. Like we're saying, to get started, you don't need the fanciest camera. Most people have a phone that's more than good enough for audio and video.
I've done whole videos with just my phone.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Same. And, it's the same with, when it comes to learning how to do all these things, and there's free resources out there. But I have a question. Were you already making money through your brand before the sponsorships started coming in, or were you still not making any money from like YouTube or your podcasts?
No, we've been making money on YouTube for a while.
So before the sponsors came in, we had been making money on YouTube for a little bit because we
Like
hit
AdSense?
AdSense, yeah. So it was just AdSense, and it was small dollars for quite a while. Nothing big. Every now and then we'd have a fun little spike, and so we might see like $70 or something like that. But Jen had kind of just been consistently putting out reels on Instagram, like at the locations and doing this, that, and the other. We grew really fast there, and then we've like hit this crazy plateau on Instagram, but we don't really care too much because it really is, we're not looking for a massive audience. We would love to continue to grow, but really it's more about the reach, right? The random interactions that we get.
That's your advertisement for podcasts and YouTube. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's how we use it. Yeah, so it was the AdSense on YouTube. And honestly, like, this has become an issue with the IRS as well, because if your company isn't making money, they won't treat it as a business. They'll treat it as a hobby. And you won't get to take your business expenses for your creations.
Right.
So you got to be aware you have 3 years to make a profit.
Yeah. So that's kind of that was one thing that kind of caught us by surprise when we were doing our taxes 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Because we hadn't quite made that much. Like the most we had made in 1 year might have been like $700, $600 total for the whole year from AdSense. And we had started growing. It was our third year kind of filing taxes, trying to claim expenses. And our tax guy said, hey, you could get audited for this. Are you sure you want to claim this? Like, because, kind of the general rule of thumb by the IRS is that you have 3 years to show profitability. Otherwise, they might just consider it a hobby. And we talked about it for a while. We're like, no, like we know we're confident in this. We're absolutely we're doing it. Like we had already tried to file for like a trademark, trademark or something like that.
Walk with history.
So we had been doing the things that we felt we could defend, any tax type stuff, right? I keep track of receipts and I treat that piece of it like a business.
Right.
But it was something to think about, right? So that's another piece of as you become a creator and
we made a profit last year.
And we made a profit last year.
Yay.
Wasn't much, but we made some. We're kind of on the upward trend. So
that's great.
But
so think about that.
Something to think
about. If you're like, if I want this to be a business, and like we feel like we're setting the foundation for a business.
Yeah.
It's going to take some time, but we feel like it'll get there. You have to be in that mindset.
Right.
And so it kind of helps. Like,
if I'd have known that, I might not have filed it as a business expense like the first year. I might have skipped that first year, but it ended up kind of coming out okay. So we're in a better spot now.
So when did you actually start? Did you like create an LLC for your business, or like when did you start like doing that after you started content creation, or was it beforehand?
Like first year.
Yeah, we started. I think we started making money.
Second year.
Yeah, like pretty early on.
Because we were claiming. I think it might have been after our first 6 months because we started about early in the year, like mid-year, March or something like that. So we didn't claim it that first year, but I think we started claiming it after that because we would legitimately we'd go to museum and we were filming, right? And we didn't claim the tickets for our whole family, but just for Jen and I. Right? So we mileage, and we would claim just if we were just doing a trip for that.
And we had museums specifically ask us to come cover them. Like we had the Pueblo Air Museum in Colorado ask us to come out. They gave us a free lifetime membership, which is equivalent to like $1,000.
Yeah.
And they let me sit in an F-15, which I don't let anyone do. They let me go inside the B-29 throughout the whole B-29. That's the same aircraft that dropped the bombs on Japan.
Yeah. So when it came to the tax thing, we were getting these kinds of benefits that we could point to. It's like, hey, we've got something here. We could defend ourselves. We didn't create an LLC. I still want to do that. We treated it like a sole proprietorship, right? Because with her kind of at the front of it. And then our tax guy kind of had like a form that I essentially I used that. I created my own like Notion template. And so then I just, whenever we go somewhere, do something, I keep the receipts. And at the end of the trip, I kind of file it all away.
Right.
But yeah.
Being organized, treating it like a business.
Yeah.
If you want it to make you money one day, you got to treat it like a business.
Yeah. The IRS will want their money if you're going to treat it like a business.
Doing stuff like that kind of helps you kind of realize like, okay, am I getting my return on investment? Doing the pitch deck, it's a good exercise for you just to be like, what could I tell a sponsor that I would give them? Like, what audience are they looking for? It's a good mental exercise. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of benefit there, even if you don't start, quote unquote, the business for like another year or two. Going through those motions is just a good exercise for anybody who thinks they can do content creation like what we're doing, and what you're doing, Ed, for multiple years. So
So the people that want to be content creators, they have to want it as much as any other job, basically. And if you want it to make you money, if you want to replace your income working wherever you're working now or whatever your job is with content creation, basically your advice is treat it like you are starting a business, right? Like if you were to start, I don't know, any kind of business, right?
Yeah. A small business.
Law firm,
you
whatever.
track the money you're spending, you track the money you're gaining, and then you just kind of try to balance your books at the end of the year.
Because when these sponsors pay you, you're going to get a 1099 for that.
Yep.
Like you're going to have to declare that to the IRS. So have a plan. Like, is it going to be part of my profit with my other job? Am I going to treat this like a business? Am I going to show profit and loss in my business? So you have to have a plan for this, because if it grows, you got to have that foundation. The IRS is expecting to see that foundation.
So that's another thing. A lot of people talk about, when should I hire an editor? When should I have someone create my thumbnails, et cetera? But this is another piece of like, when should I hire, someone to deal with my finances or, that kind of stuff, or the business end of things, which is something interesting to think about. So another thing I wanted to touch on, because it's really interesting and exciting, and talking about sponsorships and how you made those things happen. You guys were just on an episode of HGTV House Hunters, correct? Just released March 8th. It's March 12th, 2020 right now. So how the heck did that happen? Basically, that's my question is, how did that happen?
I'll start the story off and then I'll let Jen go. So we were, there's certain things we kind of can't, we signed an NDA, so we can't talk about too much behind the scenes stuff, but we were going through the process of looking for a home and sitting in our living room and in Norfolk, right? So I'm in the Navy. Navy's moving us around. So we're getting ready to move because the Navy's moving us out to the Memphis area. And I'm sitting in the living room just kind of watching TV. And Jen goes, I'm going to apply to be on House Hunters. I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Right. And so she goes on the website and just applies right through the website. And the next day she gets a call from a field producer.
Yeah. And it was crazy because we had to do a Zoom interview and they liked our interview. And so they moved ahead with casting us. And with Scott being in the Navy, he has to get approval to do all this. And so we had the kids off for spring break. So we just kind of made it happen. But for me, Ed, it's one of those things. I'm always looking at different ways to market us. I'm always looking at different ways to get our faces out there in front of people, because we believe in this so much. We believe that this is a great family thing. This is a great couples thing. This is a great individual thing. Like, it's out there in your own backyard. We want to get people active. We want to get people off of screens. We want to get people outside. And so it's just something we really believe in. And we just feel like if more people knew about it, they would be more excited about doing it. And so it was one of those things, like they allowed me to talk about the podcast on House Hunters because we were looking for podcasting space.
That's awesome.
This is our podcasting space in our house. Yeah. And we had done years of setting up the mics and taking down the mics on your kitchen table and rallying after the kids had gone to bed at 9 o'clock. Right? Where you're so tired. You're like,
the first 3 years, that's how we did it.
Film our podcast, right? And so we'd have to rally together, which I would say it helps being a partnership, because there are times when I'm not, up for it and Scott is, and he gets me energized and vice versa. And then you don't feel like all the weight of everything is on you as well. Like, I don't have to worry about the editing. I'll worry about the content. And so you don't feel as overwhelmed, which is great too. But yeah, that was really awesome. We got to see what it's like to have a crew, see what it's like to film.
It was neat.
Because that's kind of what we would love to do. We would love to turn Walk with History into an actual show.
Yeah.
And you could do the Walk with History of Salem, right? And I could take you to historic locations, a cool historic place to eat, a place to stay, and treat it like a Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, but the Walk with History side of it. And we just thought this would be a great idea and great for families and things like that. So another thing, Ed, is the military has, it hinders and helps. It hinders because once it's hard to have a job as a spouse because you move so much. Unless you work from home, it's not really conducive. So having a show that's history based on location, every time we move, it helps with that radius of what we cover historically. So we kind of like took what we were given and made, lemonade from lemons. It was like, we're taking this lifestyle that's difficult, but we're going to use it to our advantage for our content creation. So I think they kind of liked that aspect of it too.
That's awesome. And so if someone wanted to watch your episode of House Hunters, like where would they find it, or what would they search?
You can find it on demand.
You can find it on demand.
So HGTV.
Season 257, episode
6.
6.
It's called Staying Put in Memphis, because we should be here for a little while with the Navy, which is rare.
And there's 257 seasons.
Yeah, I don't know how they do their seasons.
Wow.
That show's been on for like 20 years.
Yes.
So I don't know how they do their seasons, but that's, if you look it up by seasons, it's season 257, episode 6.
And then what's on Hulu? I think it's on Amazon Prime, wherever you can stream HGTV.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's excellent. I think that's an excellent way to end today. Thank you so much for coming on, being our second guests ever. And it was a wonderful conversation, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure that the audience learned a ton too. So how can everyone find you? Anything you want to shout out before we end today?
So I'd say the best place to find us is our website. There's links to all of our stuff, right? So if you're if you're a podcaster, if you're watch videos, you have newsletters. So if you go to walkwithhistory.net, that's where you can find links to all of our stuff, and you can follow us there and go wherever you like.
Yep. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, run all of those.
Yeah. And Ed, good luck to you on the podcast. I think it's awesome that you're starting one, because podcasting's super fun.
Yeah, I'm finding it really fun, actually. And to be honest, because this podcast is all about transparency, and I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm learning with the audience, so I thought I was going to be a lot more nervous and tripped up when having conversations with people, but once I get started, it's really fun, and it kind of just flows, and it's been great. So a podcast definitely can help you in your content creation journey, because just the networking alone, right? Because now we have our audiences are intersecting, which is huge. So think about that if you're a content creator. But thank you so much. And don't forget, Talk with History podcast. You'll find it on all major podcast platforms, and Walk with History on YouTube, walkwithhistory.net. Scott and Jen, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And have a great day.
You too. Right, thank you.
Thank you.